Sit back as we tell you a story that sounds too insane to be true, but every word of it is real. Before we get started, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button because you won't want to miss stories like this one. Picture this. A man sitting at a laptop in Manila controls an empire that stretches across continents. He's not a tech CEO. He's not a Wall Street billionaire. He's something far more dangerous, and for years nobody even knew his name. This is the story of Paul Le Roux, the criminal mastermind who built a 21st century cartel from behind a computer screen and outsmarted everyone who came after him. You're going to learn how an ordinary computer programmer became the most versatile criminal in modern history. You'll discover how he built an empire that sold painkillers, smuggled cocaine, dealt weapons to Iran, hired mercenaries, and ordered murders, all while staying completely invisible to law enforcement. And you'll find out how, even when they finally caught him, the story took one more shocking twist that nobody saw coming. But here's the thing. This isn't just another crime story. This is about how one man exploited the digital age to create a kind of criminal empire that law enforcement had never even imagined. It's about how someone can hide in plain sight when they understand technology better than the people hunting them. And it's about the dedicated agents who spent nearly a decade trying to bring him down, only to realize they were always one step behind. The problem started small, or at least it seemed that way. In the early 2000s, Americans were ordering prescription painkillers online at an astonishing rate. Real doctors were signing prescriptions. Real pharmacists were filling them. Pills were being shipped by FedEx by the millions across the United States. On the surface, it looked like a legitimate business operation. Just another online pharmacy taking advantage of the internet boom. But something was wrong. People were getting addicted. Overdoses were happening. And when investigators started looking closer, they found something that shouldn't have been possible. This wasn't a medical operation at all. It was a carefully orchestrated criminal enterprise generating hundreds of millions of dollars. And the man pulling all the strings wasn't even in the United States. In Minneapolis, two DEA diversion investigators named Kimberly Brill and Steve Holdren started digging through mountains of data. Hundreds of thousands of shipping records from FedEx. These weren't the gun-carrying agents you see in movies. They were paper pushers, analysts, the kind of people who track prescription medications that get diverted to illegal markets. It was tedious work, the kind that requires staring at spreadsheets for hours, looking for patterns that might not even exist. But Brill and Holdren were good at their jobs, and they noticed something odd. Amid all the domestic shipments, there was one international package that stood out. It had been sent to a hotel in Manila in 2005, addressed to someone named Paul Le Roux. The name meant nothing to them. It meant nothing to anyone. But it was the first thread, the thinnest of reeds that would eventually unravel an empire. At the same time, halfway around the world, a DEA special agent named Kent Bailey was sitting in a bar in Minneapolis when he first heard the name that would come to dominate his life. It was spring 2008, and Bailey had just transferred to the Special Operations Division in Virginia, the unit that handles complicated international cases. Someone mentioned Paul Le Roux in passing, a name connected to the online pharmacy investigation that Brill and Holdren were working on. Bailey didn't know it then, but he was about to spend the next several years of his career chasing a ghost. Because that's what Paul Le Roux was, a ghost. Born in Rhodesia in 1972, given up for adoption, raised in South Africa during the chaos of the apartheid era, Le Roux grew up in a world where rules were flexible and the line between legal and illegal was often blurred. He was brilliant, the kind of guy who could teach himself programming and encryption at a level that put him ahead of most professionals in the field. In 1999, he created encryption software called E4M, a sophisticated program that would later inspire more famous platforms. But he never got the recognition or the money he thought he deserved. People took his ideas, built on them, made fortunes, and Le Roux watched from the sidelines, bitter and frustrated. He decided that if the legitimate tech world wasn't going to reward his genius, he'd find another way. So he started an online pharmacy. But not just any pharmacy. Le Roux understood something that most people didn't. The internet was still the Wild West, a place where someone with enough technical knowledge could operate in the shadows, moving money through shell companies, hiding identities behind layers of encryption, and coordinating operations across multiple countries without ever leaving his apartment. His pharmacy business, RX Limited, wasn't just successful. It was a gold mine. Within a few years, he was making $300 million in sales, flooding America with addictive painkillers while staying completely under the radar. He operated from Manila, using encrypted email servers that he'd designed himself, servers that periodically destroyed messages so there would be no trail. He hired call center workers in the Philippines who had no idea who they were really working for. He recruited doctors and pharmacists in the United States who signed off on prescriptions without asking questions. Everything was compartmentalized. Everyone knew only their small piece of the puzzle. Nobody saw the whole picture except Le Roux. But the pills were just the beginning. Once Le Roux had that kind of money flowing in, his ambitions grew. He wasn't content being a drug dealer. He wanted to be something more, something bigger. He started diversifying, and that's when things got truly insane. He bought yachts and filled them with cocaine worth $100 million. He arranged shipments of methamphetamine from North Korea. He brokered weapons deals with Iran and armed Somali militias. He owned safe houses in Hong Kong filled with gold bars, diamonds, and silver. He recruited teams of former military operators, hardened ex-soldiers from elite units in the United States and other NATO countries, men who knew how to kill and were willing to do it for the right price. These weren't just bodyguards. They were his mercenary army, a private force that Le Roux used to eliminate anyone who got in his way, threatened his business, or tried to steal from him. He ordered at least 7 murders that we know of, probably more. People who crossed him simply disappeared. And through it all, nobody knew who he was. Not the victims. Not the employees. Not even most of his own associates. Le Roux kept everything so tightly controlled, so carefully compartmentalized, that even people working directly for him often didn't know his real name. He was a ghost operating a global criminal empire from a laptop, the kind of crime boss that law enforcement had never encountered before. There was no cartel structure to infiltrate, no gang hierarchy to dismantle, no physical territory to raid. It was all digital, all encrypted, all invisible. Back in the United States, Brill, Holdren, and Bailey were hitting wall after wall. Every time they thought they were getting close, the trail went cold. Le Roux had set up hundreds of shell companies, fake identities, and front businesses. Money moved through offshore accounts faster than they could trace it. His email servers were unbreakable. They knew someone was out there running this operation, but they couldn't prove who it was or where they were. It was infuriating. Here were a couple of investigators in Minneapolis with desktop computers and notebooks, going up against a global network worth hundreds of millions of dollars, run by an encryption expert who seemed to be 10 steps ahead of them at every turn. Times it seemed almost laughable. But they didn't give up. Brill became obsessed. This was her case, her white whale. She spent years building a profile of Le Roux, piecing together fragments of information from shipping records, financial transactions, and witness statements. She knew he existed. She knew he was out there somewhere. She just had to find him. The break came from an unexpected place. One of Le Roux's own people turned on him. In the criminal world, loyalty is everything, but it's also fragile. When you're running an empire built on fear and compartmentalization, eventually someone gets scared enough or angry enough to flip. The DM managed to recruit one of Le Roux's former associates, someone who knew enough about the operation to help them set a trap. They created a fake deal, a big methamphetamine for cocaine transaction that would supposedly take place in Liberia. By this time, Le Roux was hungry to expand his empire even further, to connect with Colombian cartels and dominate drug shipping routes across the Pacific. The offer was too good to resist. He took the bait. On September 26, 2012, Paul Le Roux flew to Liberia for what he thought was a meeting with a Colombian drug dealer. Instead, he walked straight into the arms of the DEA. They arrested him on the spot and immediately brought him back to the United States. After nearly a decade of chasing a ghost, they finally had him. Kimberly Brill, the diversion investigator who had spent years obsessed with this case, finally got to sit in a room across from Paul Le Roux. It was the moment where the two people who knew the most about this operation in the world were face to face. She had tracked him down. He had been caught. But here's where the story takes its most shocking turn. Paul Le Roux, the criminal mastermind who had outsmarted law enforcement for years, who had built an empire on secrecy and violence, who had ordered murders and trafficked drugs and weapons across the globe, did something that nobody expected. He flipped. Almost immediately after his arrest, he signed a proffer agreement. He agreed to cooperate with the United States government in exchange for a reduced sentence and immunity for any other crimes he might admit to. And then he started talking. He admitted to ordering or participating in 7 murders. He gave up details about his entire operation. He handed over his network of mercenaries, his drug dealers, his weapons contacts. He became an informant, an undercover operative for the very people who had been hunting him. For the next 2 years, the DA kept Le Roux's arrest completely secret. They used him to set up elaborate sting operations. They had him send emails and make phone calls, pretending he was still running his empire from somewhere out in the world. His own employees had no idea he'd been captured. Law enforcement used the illusion to take down his associates one by one. Joseph Hunter, a decorated former army soldier nicknamed Rambo who had become one of Le Roux's most brutal enforcers, was arrested for plotting to kill a DEA agent, a sting operation made possible by Le Roux's cooperation. Other mercenaries, drug dealers, and weapons smugglers followed. The empire that Le Roux had built was dismantled piece by piece, and he was the one helping to destroy it. When the news finally broke in late 2014, the world was stunned. Here was a man who had committed some of the most audacious crimes in modern history, and hardly anyone had ever heard his name. Journalist Evan Ratliff spent 4 years piecing together Le Roux's story, conducting hundreds of interviews and uncovering thousands of documents. What he found was almost unbelievable. A South African programmer who had turned himself into what one source called the most versatile criminal in history, someone who had merged the ruthlessness of a drug lord with the technological savvy of a Silicon Valley entrepreneur. Le Roux wasn't just a criminal. He was an innovator, someone who understood the digital age better than almost anyone and used that knowledge to build something that law enforcement had never encountered before. He created what some called Cartel 4.0, a criminal enterprise that used the tools of the modern economy: encrypted communication, cloud sharing, rapid scalability, and sophisticated money laundering techniques. He built a dark web before most people even knew what that meant. In June 2020, Paul Le Roux was finally sentenced. The judge, Ronnie Abrams, didn't mince words. She said the scope and severity of his criminal conduct was nothing short of breathtaking, that she had before her a man who had engaged in conduct in keeping with a villain in a James Bond movie. But she also acknowledged his cooperation and the danger he now faced because of it. She sentenced him to 25 years in prison. Given everything he'd done, some people thought it was too lenient. Others pointed out that without his cooperation, many of his associates would never have been caught. The debate continues to this day. Did the United States government get played? Did Le Roux outsmart them one last time by cutting a deal that let him avoid what could have been a death sentence or life in prison? Or did they get exactly what they needed? A way to dismantle an empire that would have been nearly impossible to take down otherwise. What we do know is this: Paul Le Roux built something extraordinary and terrifying. He proved that, in the digital age, a single person with enough intelligence and ruthlessness can create a global criminal network from behind a laptop. He showed that the old models of organized crime, the cartels with hierarchies and territories and physical infrastructure, were obsolete. He operated in the shadows of the internet, in the gaps between jurisdictions, in the spaces where law enforcement struggled to keep up. And for years he won. He outsmarted local police, international agencies, and his own competition. He built an empire worth hundreds of millions of dollars. He ordered murders and trafficked drugs and weapons across continents. And nobody saw him coming because he was a new kind of criminal, a mastermind built by and for the 21st century. The people he employed, the mercenaries and call center workers and real estate agents and pilots, most of them had no idea who they were really working for. They were ordinary people who got caught in the web of someone extraordinary. Le Roux understood human psychology as well as he understood technology. He knew how to compartmentalize information so that nobody could connect the dots. He knew how to inspire fear and loyalty in equal measure. He knew how to stay invisible while controlling everything. Even now, after his arrest and conviction, there are questions that remain unanswered. Does he have money hidden away somewhere, waiting for him when he gets out of prison? Did he really give up everything to the authorities, or did he keep some secrets to himself? When he's released from U.S. custody, he's expected to be deported to the Philippines to stand trial for the murders he committed there. Will he ever actually face justice for those crimes, or will he find another way to slip through the cracks? The judge called him a James Bond villain, and in many ways that's exactly what he was. But unlike the movies, this villain was real. He lived in our world, used our technology, exploited our systems, and for a long time he was unstoppable. The story of Paul Le Roux is a warning about the dark side of innovation, about what happens when someone uses genius for destruction instead of creation. It's a reminder that the tools we build to make our lives better can also be weaponized by those who understand them well enough. And it's proof that sometimes, the most dangerous people are the ones you never see coming. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more incredible true tales like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Paul Le Roux outsmarted everyone until he didn't. His empire fell. His secrets were revealed. But the legacy of what he built, and the questions about whether he truly lost in the end, those remain. Because even behind bars, Paul Le Roux proved one thing. In the digital age, the most dangerous weapon isn't a gun or a bomb. It's a mind that knows how to use the system against itself. And that's a lesson we won't soon forget.